Hello, everyone. It's Donna Cravata, and we're back again with another one of our wisdom panels. And this is the one I have been waiting for since this was just a little idea in the back of my head. This one is all about mental wellness and going from awareness to action. And we have a panel that just kind of, I mean, I don't even have words to describe how wonderful these women are. Um, I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then we're going to get right into conversation. If you've got comments, if you've got questions, put them in the chat, whether you're here live or on the replay. If you're on the replay, tag us. We will come back. We will join in this conversation and keep it going. But this is really important stuff. Even now that we're live, you should be inviting people to come and hear this because you're going to hear things about mental health, about mental wellness that you don't know. And we all need to know this. So I'm just going to dive right in. Dr. Cynthia Hover is a single mom, a psychologist who works with survivors of antagonistic relationships as they heal from trauma and burnout. Nicole Lewis-Keeber is a licensed clinical social worker turned business therapist and mindset coach who works with entrepreneurs to create and nurture healthy relationships with their businesses. She's also certified in Brene Brown's Daring Way and Dare to Lead methodologies. And she has actually trained me on the Dare to Lead methodology, which is something that I use all the time. Shulamit Levtov is a mental health professional, and she's known as the entrepreneur's therapist. She works with women business owners to care for their mental and emotional well-being. Dr. Carrie Johansson is a psychologist turned speaker and author. She works with teams, associations, corporate audiences, and dedicated individuals, helping them to learn how to navigate life's inevitable ups and downs with easy to implement strategies. And finally, Dr. Amy Hoyt is the founder of Mending, an online mental health platform focusing exclusively on trauma recovery. She started this in 2021 after a 21-year career in academia. Mending Trauma is rooted in research and designed by doctors and therapists. And before we get into the questions, I just want to say one thing. Each of these women have had long professional careers in mental health, and they saw that it wasn't really everything that needed to be known about mental health, mental wellness, and they found different paths. And we're going to talk a lot about the different paths that they've chosen and how the direction that they are heading in now is different from what they were doing in the past. So now that we've introduced you and we've talked about you a little bit, let's just jump into just talking about mental health awareness. And, let's just chime in on, what this means to you and why it's so important that there is a broader awareness about mental health, mental wellness.
I would say with mental health, it's always, I'm glad that it's becoming more mainstream. I think it's becoming more acceptable to say, I have a therapy appointment this week. I'm talking to my therapist, which I love. But if we don't have our mental health, we don't have anything. We don't have our physical health. Everything is based on our mental health, and it can't be overlooked, even though people are very good at trying to put on a strong face that they're okay.
I agree. Absolutely. Oh,
go ahead, Amy.
I absolutely agree. Thank you, Shula. I was thinking as you were talking, Cynthia, about the mind-body connection and how we in the West have been so divorced from our body. And it is starting to change in that our mental health directly affects our physical health, and our physical health directly affects our mental health. And so we really can't separate them. So I love what you pointed out, and just this broader awareness that we're starting to see in our culture.
One of the Donna, you gave us permission to talk about stuff that pet peeves or things that get to us. When we talk about mental health awareness, what bugs me is the use of the term mental health. It's like people don't even stop to think what the words actually mean. So somebody will say, well, I have mental health. Well, actually, it's a spectrum. I know everybody here knows it, but I'm just naming something that I see. It's a spectrum from mental health to mental illness. And we all fall on the spectrum somewhere. And we could say that our mental health is either, it goes from well to less well. And we can see also that that our functioning in the world can fall along a spectrum along with our lesser or greater degree of mental health. And so nobody talks about, or very few people in the general population talk about mental illness. But that's what we think when we hear mental health. And that's why there's a stigma around mental health. Because if you think physical health, there's no stigma around physical health. There's stigma around sickness, right? But yet somehow we've elided the ideas around mental health and mental illness into this one big mush, when I think it would serve us much better to recognize, like the Canadian Mental Health Association says, we all have mental health. 5 out of 5 Canadians have mental health, right? And so just to open up the discussion to say that, what happens to us in our lives and in our businesses and in the world will move us one way or another along that spectrum, right? And that we're not necessarily, even when you have a diagnosis, your place on that spectrum isn't fixed. It's a dynamic, just like physical health, it's a dynamic experience.
And go ahead. I would add, I also think that one of the disservices that we're doing to our population right now and to ourselves is this idea that mental health means that you have a problem-free life.
Yes.
That success here is not a problem-free life, although I'm volunteering for one, right? Like, bring it, I'll take it. But mental health is actually means that you have enough resiliency, enough ability to manage your emotions, not that you are anxiety free or that you never get sad or that you don't have a bad day. Like, it's actually a continuum on a daily basis of how close are you. I always talk to my clients about this hierarchy of like, here's your best self and here's your worst self. And it reboots each morning. And if you wake up and you have had a crummy night's sleep, you're probably going to be a little closer down to worse self-functioning. And your goal for the day is just to try and level up a little bit, not to get to perfection. So that notion of mental health versus mental illness, yes, it's a continuum. And it's also predicated on the fact that life is bumpy and you're going to have better days and worse days. And it's really about management of emotions, not eliminating problem emotions.
Mm-hmm. And it's part of being human. It's what it is to be human. There are no humans who don't have this experience.
Nicole, I'm curious about your perspective.
I'm taking it in and I agree. I feel like when we can use more descriptive and accurate terminology around what we're talking about, that enhances what awareness is. Because right now we're saying mental health awareness. What does that even mean, right? So I'm very much on board with let's call a thing and let's get the thing right. And so I agree. I agree that it's a spectrum. I agree that there is no there, like the perfectionistic piece of I am mentally healthy. This minute, maybe. Next minute, maybe not. And I think there's just so much compassion and permission and humanity in the way that you all are speaking about how we define what this is. And I think that that's a very important first step to building awareness at large, because I'm one of those people who believes that we're probably going to talk about stigma later, but the stigma and kind of vagueness of whatever this means, I think it's by design personally. And so I think the more specific you can be, the more, context we can give, the better. So I'm down. I'm down for this conversation, and I agree.
I knew you would be. So I would like to ask, what are some of the terminology, the words that you would prefer to see people using?
I love having people. I feel like right now, particularly in the self-help industry, we are pathologizing everybody, and folks are coming in and they're claiming their pathology. Well, my anxiety prevents me from doing blah, blah, blah. Right. And I'm like, well, let's get some separation between you and the anxiety. Like the anxiety is making a hostile takeover. It's not yours. It's not, you don't need to own it. At the same time, I think it has been decreasing the stigma for people to be able to say, I struggle with anxiety. So it's like that balance between being able to say things out loud and label them, and at the same time, not necessarily owning it so much that you have put yourself into a box that you can't get out of.
Yeah, I think the same thing with the labels. Like I've always struggled that even with clients coming in saying, I have this, or I've been told I have that, or I saw on TikTok I have this. And I'll say, it's not necessarily like, let's just take the label out of it. I mean, we have the DSM because we have to if we're billing insurance and all of that. But I think everyone is a human, and I really like the term that we're using today, mental wellness, because it is I think the people who come to seek out mental wellness are the most healthy people. They're the people who don't want to go and get treatment or coaching or to do those things. They can, I find the people who are willing to dive deep, they're the strong ones.
And I really love using the language of the nervous system and looking at how resourced I am, or if I'm feeling regulated or dysregulated, looking at what state my nervous system is in. And it's less pathology and more information. And that's what we like to teach our clients, is taking that information from the environment and mostly from our internal cues, trusting those, because we know, that can be difficult, and then using that information to figure out what we need in that moment, if anything. And I feel like that's so much more productive than labels.
And it's so much more actionable, right?
Yes.
Like you have information, then you can make a choice about what you want to do with it, including just leaving it be.
That's right. That's right.
That action is really the key. I think sometimes folks are drowning in all of the emotion and they aren't understanding that emotion is just giving you information. Action is actually the key to the way out of it.
That's right. Yes.
I agree. I used to tell my clients, this is probably not a popular thing, but I used to say, they would come in and say, well, my psychiatrist told me I'm this after spending 5 minutes with them. They've given them this diagnosis. And I said, your diagnosis is only as accurate as how hungry that psychiatrist was that day, what they just learned about, what they found interesting in the DSM-5. And I don't mean to diss on psychiatrists, but the over-identification with the label and just the willingness to accept it. And so, what I work with people on is, this is the experience I'm having right now. These are the feelings I'm having right now. And I love that we talked about, bringing it in terms of nervous system and just letting go of some of these pathological terms that keep people over-identified with this, diagnosis that oftentimes is not even accurate. So let's just work on your experience, and let's go from there.
Yeah. And Angie is weighing in, saying that my anxiety versus I struggle with anxiety is a game changer. And that's just such a simple shift of words that can really make an impact on how you feel about yourself. And then how you feel about yourself is going to be reflected out into how people perceive you. And just that one thing alone could be something that works in favor of ending stigma.
Absolutely.
I like what, the names are not popping up. So now I can't see. I think it might've been Carrie who said, yes, Dr. Carrie, who talked about, who brought this up and talked about creating some space, I think is the word you used. And there's a technique that I teach that fosters people in having this, much like you do informally, where I'm noticing something in me is feeling something.
Right.
So that there's and the purpose for this, just like what you did, is there's an I. So when I say I, me, I notice, then all of a sudden I'm in contact with my capacity, the whole of me that sees what's happening. And then when there's something in me that's having a feeling, it's got a life and I can be in relationship with it rather than drowning in it. And that the capacity of the I to accompany, to self-accompany, is so powerful to give us what Amy talks about, that experience of emotional regulation, which is to say, not that we squash, like, because there's kind of like a thing about, well, go regulate yourself, girl. Don't be upset, right? That there is kind of like this, if you're dysregulated, go sort yourself out. But really, I'm sure we all hold the value that the regulation is rather that we can connect with and relate to and open to the wisdom from that part of us that is having that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And along with that, Shula, I think like I think people are so scared of negative emotion. You know, it's all, we always want to like be happy, like, you know, the toxic positivity. And sometimes what people really need is like, I hear your trauma. I hear your pain. Let me sit with you in that. Let's not like immediately have to push that away, because there's a lot of information we can get from sitting with someone.
And that's a skill, right? And that's the kind of skill that folks can learn when they work with us, is how they can be with what's happening inside them. There was a yoga teacher and a psychologist, Canadian. His name is Michael Stone. And he wrote a number of books about yoga, meditation, psychotherapy. And early in my career, I remember he said something that really struck me, because of course, early in your career, you're like, ooh, am I enough? Do I have the skills? Have I got the right training? What am I doing? And he said, it's not that our woundedness is healed, that we as practitioners can serve others. It's rather that we know how to be with our woundedness and can be with others as they be with theirs. Right? And this is that capacity of the I that relates and cares for ourselves that we're talking about.
Yeah. And I want to just kind of piggyback on that, Shula, is I think part of that is co-regulation and being able to help our clients regulate by understanding how to accept hard emotions and how to sit with them. But literally, you know, it's like a Wi-Fi constantly attuning to other nervous systems in your proximity. And so when we recognize that we are helping people to co-regulate simply by sitting with them and validating, I think that's so powerful.
Well, because so much of what happens in the world invalidates it. You know, it's when we think about, I think this might touch a little bit on what Nicole talks about, that there's a purpose underlying some of the approaches. But when we, now I've lost my train of thought, but it has to do with shutting down. And so when you're shut down, you're not going to resist. You're not going to say, hey, wait a minute, maybe that doesn't work for me. Hey, wait a minute, this world wants me to just be a worker, right? It doesn't want me to ask questions, just like in school, right? Sit down, shut up, and have good grades. And so this lack of self-contact, and this is what Carl Rogers, you know, who was he was the first person to do research into the effectiveness of psychotherapy. It was a secret club before Rogers came along, and he wanted to know what actually is happening. And so he and Eugene Gendlin at the University of Chicago started studying what happened in therapy. And this is where Carl got his necessary and sufficient conditions. There's some debate about whether they're sufficient, but certainly we agree that there are necessary conditions for these things to happen. And the problem is conditions of worth, where the world, the culture in which we live, sets up conditions that we have to measure up to. Otherwise, we're not worthy human beings. And then when we're small, we don't challenge.
Well, and I think what I'm watching again, and I think this sort of goes back to popular culture right now, we're going from feeling very small and shut down and little to I'm going to blow everything up. And actually there's, you know, fundamentalist thinking is fundamentally bad for people. And so anytime we're at the bookends, we're often missing all of the more effective nuance in the middle. Mm-hmm. And so figuring out how to help people not be small and at the same time not then become bullies. And there's a path in the middle. Assertive is different than aggressive, which is different than passive, right? And so I feel like we're kind of repetitively romanticizing either being very passive or being very aggressive, and helping train people in being assertive, both with themselves and with others, is that's a simple piece of what
I would say, Carrie, along with that when people are really deeply self-connected, they aren't going to, pardon?
They aren't tempted to be at the bookends.
Yeah, because I think that your inner humanity, your inner tenderness, your inner sense of humanity, and your sense of the other person's humanity is going to be that inhibitor on the swing, especially to aggressiveness.
It's funny. I was talking about, I did a speaking gig a little while ago, and it was on a topic that I call the boundary castle, which is a different way of looking at boundaries. And I think of it as like, you are the sovereign being in your castle, who's invited in the second floor, who gets to come over for dinner in the grand hall, who's in the courtyard, even if they want to be inside the house. and who do you put out on the grounds? But it all started with my daughter showing me a TikTok video with this young woman, and she has like her hands on her hips, and she's like, I set a boundary. I told them no. And I'm just like, yeah, that's not setting a boundary. That's just being the bossy boots. And so it was really interesting, just that small conversation with my daughter in this, 30-second video. But that idea of like, boundaries are actually you talking about what you will do if someone's behavior isn't going in a direction that makes sense to you. It's not demanding that they stop. Mm-hmm. And so again, just that notion of like having some agency inside yourself is, I think, the critical thing that I think we're all talking about here.
Yeah, and this is a really good segue into talking about boundaries, because they really they kind of cement the building of the resiliency, the building of that of compassion, self-compassion and compassion for others. And, it starts within. So let's talk a little bit about boundaries and how they could be really hard. I mean, particularly for women like us, we were not raised with, you're allowed to have boundaries. It was forbidden. So how do we invite those boundaries into our lives, to our businesses, to the way we interact with ourselves?
Boundaries are my favorite topic in the whole world, because I always joke, and I feel like I have to be in integrity. Like, I have worked my whole entire 52 years of my life on setting boundaries, and it has been really hard. I have lost friends. I have lost family members. I have, I could go on, but really realizing, not to do it all maybe at the same time, but if you don't set boundaries, no one's going to set them for you. No one's going to be like, oh, I'm sorry that I'm completely monopolizing everything in your life. And, and there's kind ways to set boundaries. And I think as women, we don't want to be mean about it, but it is very hard. There's grief and loss, I think, in setting boundaries, which doesn't often get talked about, but it is life-changing. And I feel like you can't do a lot of the other work in therapy until you start setting those boundaries, because you can work so hard and someone comes back in and takes over that space and you're back at baseline.
Yeah. And, one of the things I try, Cynthia, and tell me if this aligns with what you're saying, is people don't necessarily have to end up in cutoffs. Sometimes a cutoff is super healthy, but I think a lot of times a cutoff is just a representation of someone being overwhelmed and not being able to set a boundary. And so instead of needing to go to the cutoff, it's like, oh, you're doing that thing again. Yes. I've let you know I'm going to get off the phone when you do that thing, and I'll call you back later, or call me later when you're calm, or something like that. So it's actually the best boundaries, in my opinion, are an invitation into a different level of connection in our world, not this nasty shove out.
No, as long as they respect them.
But the thing is if they don't respect them, it's like, then you set it again, and then you set it again, and then maybe the boundary gets even tighter, right? Like, oh, it seems like we can't talk on the phone. I'll send you a text, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I really appreciate the conversation about boundaries being about they're internal. It starts with us. We can't control what other people do. We can only identify what is okay, what's not okay for us. And that could be very small tweaks. It could be something bigger. It could be a protective boundary. It could be a negotiated boundary, but it really does have to start with us. And so I think getting more aware about what it is that we need is a great place to start. And in the research that I was doing with the entrepreneurs and business owners I was working with there was like 5 areas that childhood trauma really affected their business. And one of them obviously was boundaries. And we spent a lot of time on what that means, not only just for themselves internally, but what it means for their time, their calendar, their money, client work, all of those things. But if you don't know what it is you need and what's okay and what's not okay for you first, and how you best operate in your business, and what are the things that you need to be successful within and feel emotionally sustained within the business, it's really difficult to get to those other places. So we spend a lot of time of looking at boundaries that are too strict, very defended, or that are non-existent. And so it's a huge conversation. I think it's so important that we're looking at it from a not coming in with like hands on hips going, I told them no. It's not. It's about what did you need in that moment to feel safe, secure, seen, attended to, whatever that is, because we need to be able to identify that, because they're going to do what they're going to do a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes they might rise to the occasion and say, you know what? Yeah, okay, I can meet you there. That's fine. And that's wonderful when it happens, but not always. So
Yeah.
It's all, the boundaries all about me is what I think to start with.
And now Nicole brought up the subject, childhood trauma. Let's talk about that and the ability of being able to heal from trauma. I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Dr. Gabor Mate, and what he said was that trauma is a wound that is not healed. The trauma is not what happened, it's the wound that we carry inside. And the wound can be healed in the present moment. So I would really love to have a conversation around how we all carry this around. Mine is in a light blue Samsonite suitcase with no wheels from 1964. And how we all carry this, how we're not always aware of what we're carrying. And when we have that awareness, our lives could change. Like Dr. Mate says, the wound could be healed in the present moment, and it could be healed quickly. And, what are the ways that you help people heal from this? And part of this conversation too is also, how you went from being a traditional mental health professional to what you're doing today, because I am sure that this was a big part of it. Take it away, ladies.
Well, I'm grateful for how you started with the quote, because folks, there's an assumption in the general public that if something traumatic happens to you, that you will be traumatized, you will have PTSD. And it's actually, the event itself is to a large degree irrelevant. It has a lot to do with who you are and what you've been through in your life, and what are the responses to your experience around you. For example, with childhood sexual abuse, there's lots of research that shows that children who are well supported, who aren't shamed and blamed, that it isn't made worse by the people around them, but rather who are held and given resources, they heal well and grow up to do just fine. Right. Yeah. So I think it's for all of the folks who are listening, who aren't professionals, who think trauma and go, because, there are people who like, oh, what if something bad happens to me? It may or may not. And really support is what will make the difference ultimately in your capacity to end your healing process.
I love that, Shula. I just was at the trauma conference in Boston 2 weeks ago, and Dr. Vanderkolk, again, he says this quite a bit, but he's like, it's all about repair. And so if we get that repair right after the event, that's great and even better. And to Gabor's point, that repair can come later in life as well. What happens with trauma is we become so overwhelmed, and we do have a physical, biological response that often we get stuck in when there's no repair. And so the first step is really becoming aware of our trauma responses because they operate below the conscious level. And so I love that you're bringing this up. It's never too late. There is so much hope. And that's something I feel so strongly about, making sure listeners understand that the repair you didn't get when you were younger can be received now.
Yes. And we have so much information about what is effective and what works. And we have multiple modalities to choose from.
Yep.
Some of it's a little bit of an alphabet soup for people who are listening who aren't clinicians. My personal favorite is EMDR. I know, Amy, you use a bunch of different things. Shula, Cynthia, and Nicole, I'd love to hear what your favorite kind of evidence-based, which just means that we have some research that demonstrates that it works. It sounds like a fancy term. It's actually really simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really am very strongly interested in attachment theory and trauma bonding and how our relationships as children impact who we pick as our partners for adulthood, and how hard it is to get out of those relationships as adults because that's all we've ever known. And I just think that trauma is something so many people experience, and it's so personal. You know, everybody's trauma can be so different, but it could just be that interactional style that you had growing up with your parents. And when I'm looking at like antagonism in family systems or in adult relationships, there's a lot of overlap. And I think being able to recognize the patterns that you find yourself in and how hard they are to get out of. I definitely use like internal family systems and parts theory and some, you know, looking at the past, how it influences the present. But I also do, you know, EFT, hypnosis, some tapping. I do a little EMDR. I'm not like a specialist in it, but I think all those tools along the way to help you get through it are so. The EMDR explosion to me is such a gift, you know, that more people are using it. So we're not having to spend years and years just talking through you know, like trying to, let's give people some tools as they're moving through it. Cause they need relief. It's hard.
It is hard.
Amy, I would guess that you probably have great research on this, but I think that most of what is considered evidence-based trauma treatment has a nervous system soothing component to it.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's
through. It's doing some work with your body and your.
It is. So we know we have a top-down approach where we start with, you know, the cognitive and the verbal, and that works really well for a lot of people for regular, you know, relationship problems but when we're talking about trauma, we really need a bottom-up approach where we start with the body because of the below conscious awareness that's happening, all of these responses. And so EMDR is a great somatic tool. IFS has a somatic component. EFT, amazing somatically. Then, you know, we have somatic yoga. We have anything using the nervous system, anything body-based or at least body incorporated, neurofeedback, all of it is so valuable when we're looking at trauma. Absolutely.
Agreed.
Nicole, I know you have a lot to say about this too.
Well, when I think about it, in my experience, you know, leaving the world of direct practice to start a coaching business, I never really considered the fact that I would still end up doing trauma work. It wasn't on my radar. Very obvious, you know, that the people that I was working with were having trauma responses and adaptations that created their businesses and their relationship with their business. And a lot of things were being worked out through their business, including myself. Like I always include myself in that category. I did it too. But I feel like I spend probably 80% of the time educating people about what trauma is, and many of them don't recognize that they do have traumatized nervous systems, or that experience of moving when you were 7 years old because of the outcome of it without the support, or being new in school, that those things can create trauma experiences, and that they can embed in your nervous system. They can change how you see yourself. They can make an impact on what you decide to do with your life, including creating a business. And so I feel so much of the education needs to be there about normalizing and accepting the fact that, yes, that experience I had was actually traumatic to me for these reasons. And I'm still maybe working that through, or I'm still, my nervous system is still responding in this way, because I feel like that, at least in the age I grew up, that trauma was only a tiny, tiny sliver of what people, they would say, well, it's PTSD and that's it, or something really big. And the majority of the people that I work with, they have these cumulative experiences that changed how they see themselves and what is possible for them. They're not a big, traumatic event that happened. And so they have minimized, dismissed, and not shown up for themselves to support themselves as it is the trauma, to get support from the bottom up and even from the top down, because they minimized it and just had shame and didn't believe that they shouldn't need help for that experience. And so I think the more that we can educate and kind of flesh out what trauma actually is and how we can all have a very different experience, and that it can actually show up in places like your business. It can show up in why you decided to start a business in the first place, because you always wanted to be in control and you always wanted to be the person who had final say. Right? That absolutely happens. Every day I see it happen. So the more that we can flesh that out, the more that we can talk about it, the more that we can make, kind of those tendrils out into, like, trauma is affecting all of these things: relationship, work, business, money. Shula does a lot of work with trauma and money. I think the more liberated we will be, and the more healed we can become. And which is why I'm very much here for everyone who's here, because we're all doing, very interesting work in trauma in different spaces that people don't always look for trauma to be impacting.
Okay. Now we have a comment. Maggie is saying it's her wish that general and family practitioners were aware of or willing to prescribe all of these different modalities. In her experience, the first go-to is meds. So I'm sure Maggie's not the only person experiencing this. How can we change that conversation that maybe, meds for some people, absolutely, they're needed. But maybe it's not the first course of action. Like, how does somebody approach that conversation, or even that thought process of maybe there's something else?
This is a real dilemma. Like you, Donna, I think meds have their place, but especially in the US American system. I'm in Canada, so it's to some degree less here than it is in the US. But in the US system, where most people access mental health care either through the medical system and through their medical insurance. And the way, and you here all know this, I'm saying this for the listener, that you have to have a diagnosis and a code in order to bill, in order for the insurance company to reimburse. So we're strictly within the diagnosis, pathology, treatment, and cure methodology. And in that model, meds are the prescribed treatment for the most part. Then the second aspect, and we see this quite a lot in Canada, is that doctors will prescribe CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because there has been, especially, I'm not sure about in the US, but in Canada, a very strong lobby by the researchers doing the work around cognitive behavioral therapy to establish their research as the gold standard, and because it's manualized, because it can be taught step by step, and it can be measured, and outcomes can be measured, and it can be delivered in this, and it fits very well within the medical structure. And this is, again, not to diss CBT either. It has its role. And at the same time, when we're talking about the psyche and the spirit, essentially, in my opinion, we end up with friction when we try to offer care for the psyche and the spirit within a framework that requires treatment and diagnosis and codes and billing. And so this is why doctors do what they do, because they're set up to do it that way. And I am unsure how, like, it would require systemic change. It would require lobbying, a sustained and concerted lobby to change what's happening in medical education for this sea change to occur. That's my opinion.
Sheila, I agree. And I was just, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, pharmaceutical companies have reps that go in and talk to doctors regularly. We don't have a therapist lobby or a mental health lobby that's going in for a regular check-in with a doctor. Like, have you been prescribing neurofeedback? How's that going? How'd it go with the somatic therapy tips I was giving you? So we're not, unfortunately, we're not as profitable as big pharma, and we're not as organized per se. But I agree, it's a systemic change. I don't have the answer.
I think physicians perhaps being more open to talking with therapists. I've offered time to go speak at medical colleges, and sometimes, it's met with resistance. It's like they don't have time, they have to learn a bazillion things. They only get 10 minutes with a client. They're pulling out, well, let's try this. That people want an easy fix, and meds can work pretty quickly. And I too believe in medicine in combination with therapy. But I think, again, we don't have those strong lobbyists, and we don't have all that money to get the work.
And to be clear, primary care physicians are overworked. They're completely overwhelmed. They're inundated. They're the frontline workers for mental health right now. That in ER doctors. I mean, it's awful to see what they have to deal with as well. It is really systemic, and there's no winners in this system, really.
Well, yes, the winners in the system are the
pharmaceutical companies.
That make the money.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, okay, we're not going to create a systemic change on our panel, but what I would really like is for you to share your stories of how you went from being a traditional mental health professional to what you're doing today, and really explain what you're doing and why you made this shift, because I'm pretty sure that question that Maggie asked is what precipitated the change that you made in the work that you do.
So if I could piggyback, actually, Shula, on your comments about CBT, I've been in private practice a very long time. I'll summarize by saying, 22 years in, I've had a couple of different theoretical orientations, and I won't bore the listeners with what they have all been. But the thing that I have moved away from is CBT, because one of the problems that I ran into with CBT is about cognitions, behavior. It's that triangle of your feelings, your thoughts, and your behaviors. And that triangle, I think, is very valid. My issue with CBT is it would have you be challenging a quote unquote negative thought, but sometimes it's just the truth, right? Sometimes your dad is dying of cancer. Sometimes your spouse is cheating on you. Sometimes you're behaving really badly. Sometimes there's addiction in your family, right? Sometimes there's something that is quote unquote negative that's going on. That's true. And I moved my theoretical orientation to one called acceptance and commitment therapy, in large part because of that word acceptance. So when we are working with actual reality, not the reality you wish had happened 20 years ago, not the reality that you wish will happen, not 10 pounds from now, right? Like the actual reality that you're in, that is where you have the most autonomy, the most power, the most agency, the most choices, even if you're in a reality that you absolutely don't want, didn't ask for, don't like. Getting really honest about the reality that you're in and being in acceptance, not approval. Acceptance just means this is what is. It doesn't mean I like it. But as soon as we increase acceptance, we immediately, exponentially increase our ability to do something about it.
Well, that's the Carl Rogers curious paradox, right? That how does it? I'll paraphrase. Change is only possible when I first accept myself just as I am.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm experiencing this right now. because I have AFib and I've had it for 5 years, and I've gone all through the medical system, and I've felt really defeated because I've had 4 ablations. It keeps coming back, and it comes crashing into my world. And just in the past few weeks, I've come to the realization that I've gone as far as I can with Western medicine. Now I need to find another way. I've already started to lose weight. I've already started to explore other options. I feel hopeful. I feel like I have more control over what is happening in my body and that I could actually make a change. And that is what I want people to feel walking away from this conversation. So, like, please share, like, why you made this change in your own careers and how you help people, because it is going to be a mix of that Western and Eastern, or Western and more progressive healing. And I want to hear it from you. I want everybody to hear it from you, because the work that each of you does is just, it's saving lives.
Yeah. I've always been curious about, I hung out with a lot of therapists when I was a therapist, and we were all there because we were working out some stuff, right? It was very rare that I met a therapist that had this like glowing, stellar, accepted, wonderful, protected childhood. Like we went into this, we went into this career because we were curious. We were looking to repair or change or understand something differently, which is, why I went into my career. But the thing that the system around me as a social worker did not support was us taking care of ourselves. And so I left my career at 18 years in because I was completely burnt out, physically, emotionally, spiritually, morally, you name it. I was burnt to a crisp there. And so I thought, well, I have all these gifts and all this experience. I still want to work with people. How can I do this? And so I thought, well, coaching. So I got certified to do money mindset coaching. And it was wonderful. It was a life-changing experience. But what I didn't recognize is that all those behaviors, patterns, and adaptations that I had, that kept me in people pleasing and kept me overworking and not putting it all came with me into my own business. And so I had to get really clear about, okay, so how did my childhood trauma impact me in my career choice, how I allowed myself to be treated, the money I could make, and how this is showing up for me again here in my business, because there's no one else here but me. So I'm the one creating the environment for myself to be abused by my business, underpaid, and treated poorly. Like it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. So, it was so enlightening, but also frustrating, because as I started to look around to see, okay, who's doing work around trauma and business business ownership, there really wasn't a whole lot out there. Like this was 10 years ago. And so I kind of had to do it. I had to start, working on that myself, because I couldn't find those resources because I wanted things to change. So that's really kind of how my business evolved. I don't do a lot of money mindset stuff anymore because I have a lot of feelings about mindset work. But I think we build it as we go along, and we heal ourselves as we go through this process. And that has been very true for me as a business owner who works at the intersection of trauma and entrepreneurship, and who makes people call it trauma instead of something else that feels a little bit better to call it. And, educating and growing and learning, and the business I had 8-10 years ago is not the business I have now, because what we understand to be true about trauma, how we can treat it, how we can support people, and also how the systems around us create and continue to be a part of how we stay traumatized, it's all changed. So for me, my business is all about healing, about education, about learning and growing. And maybe someday there will be a credential for what I do. There's not, but I do recognize every day I take a risk for my license and doing the work that I do. So for me, it's rebellion, it's healing, and it's all about changing what people can do, because I don't want your business not to work because you have childhood trauma embedded in your business that's playing itself out. It might be because you have a bad idea, a bad business plan, but I don't want it to be because of that. And so that's my mission and why I do what I do.
I like what you say, Nicole, about how, when we in school and in our profession, we're not taught to care for ourselves. There's a lot of talk about self-care, right? As a therapist, you're supposed to engage in self-care, but it's not an integral part of our programs. And we're the work that go into is such that in order to earn a living, we have to work at a deficit, right, at our own cost. And so I saw this belief that as a therapist, if you burnt out, it was because you didn't have enough self-care. You didn't engage in enough self-care. And at a certain point, I was like, but we're humans doing work with other humans, and we are affected as humans by that work. So of course, it's going to have an impact on us, not necessarily that we're going to burn out per se, but that this impact is an inherent risk in the work of therapists and of therapy. And that if we struggle, it's not our fault. It's the nature of the work. And so when I began to integrate that, I'm also a trauma survivor, and I did my trauma therapy and became a therapist long after my own trauma journey. And so I integrated this insight into how I set up my business as a response to what I saw happening in the rest of the world, particularly agency work. And then when I started to see the impact of entrepreneurship on people's mental health, and clients would come to my office and they would say to me, well, it's my fault I've burnt out. I just haven't put self-care on the table. I just haven't, I never take vacation. I know I should exercise. I know I should work out. And they were making it their own fault. And I saw that the same pattern applied, that mental health challenges are inherent in entrepreneurship. It's not a question of will you be affected, but when and to what degree. And so first and foremost, and this is the actionable thing that I hope that folks would take away for themselves, first and foremost, there's nothing wrong with you. Going back to the trauma work that I used to do, we will say folks who have trauma adaptations, trauma symptoms, people who are traumatized, there's nothing wrong with them. They are having a normal reaction to abnormal conditions. Anybody who's been through what they've been through would have a similar kind of reaction. In fact, your body is doing what's right because it's telling you it needs care. It's giving you like the check engine light, and that's a good thing. And so just with to bring it home to the entrepreneurs that I work with, this is data in our business when we are starting to break down. It's good, not fun, not enjoyable, not nice, but good data. So when we notice we're having a hard time, we can go, oh, wait a minute. Just like we were talking at the beginning, Carrie, I'm noticing something's going on with me. I'm noticing I'm having distress. I'm noticing something in me is anxious. And so I would be, given the conditions that are occurring here. There's nothing wrong with me, right? And then we can take a breath and say, okay, so what is the next step right in this moment that is needed to care for me? Because there's nothing wrong with me. I just need care.
Shula, oh my gosh, the subtitle, I was looking for the word, the subtitle of my book. So my clients essentially asked me to write a book of like, what do I do the next time my boss is being a jerk? Like, I don't want to read a 300-page book on anger management. And so my book is called Self-Help on the Go, but the subtitle is Because You Are Not Broken, but Life Gets Tricky Sometimes. So it's normalizing, like, life gets tricky. You're not broken. Like, we got this. And even if you do feel broken, like, all of us today are talking about all the different ways that you can get to feeling better and doing better.
Yeah.
And I'm very passionate about burnout because I've been through burnout, and my whole career just transitioned to completely I just sold my private practice. I had a whole therapist office full of doctoral students, therapists. And last year I thought it was, my mom passing and then my stepfather passing, but then I realized it was a bigger even bigger thing. But I said enough, because I was literally at a point where I had worked so hard. I'm a Gen Xer. I was raised by my great grandparents. It was work hard, work hard, work hard. And I worked. And I realized, like, oof, there ain't going to be any of me left. And I believe burnout is, like, I look at it as as a physical burn. So we have 1st-degree burnout, where we're getting some of those symptoms that are coming. Then we have our 2nd-degree burn. Maybe things are bubbling up and it's time to go, really look at it. Then we get to 3rd-degree burn, and and most people seek help when they're in 3rd-degree burnout. And by that time, your physical health is suffering, everything's suffering, your relationships, you're probably holding on by a thread. But as entrepreneurs, especially, we think we can just keep going and fixing it and bring someone else in and make more money, like we're just always. And, when it came right down to it, I think stopping and saying, I want to work with women who want to live their best life, right? Like, enjoy being a mom. I'm really passionate about moms who started parenting older in life, and they're missing it. They're missing their kids grow up because they're so burnt out. And I want moms to stop and have fun and enjoy their kids' childhood, and also have their own life. So when their kids go off, they're not like, oh my God, what happened to me? So, the little things and I think doing traditional therapy, I couldn't reach so many people. It's like one-on-one work was limiting. I love it. I still do it with, I always have like certain one-on-one clients, but I think being able to reach more people and group support for women, I think is crucial, to have like-minded women in a group and functioning and feeding off each other and that beautiful energy, kind of like what we're doing today. It's a game changer.
Awesome. Well, I feel like I'm a little bit opposite of you all, because I entered the field of mental health, in 2021, coming from a career in academia. And for me, I did my doctoral dissertation on women's agency. And I really wanted to know how women felt like they had choices or could control decisions in their lives. And I took that research and started researching mass trauma after genocide and apartheid in Africa. And the literature was really clear that after a mass trauma or an individual trauma, in order to repair, there's many things we need to do to repair. But in terms of spiritual repair, of course, I was coming from a religious studies background, and looking at forgiveness, you have to be able to make a decision if you want to start going down the road of forgiveness. Well, if you've lost agency, which is what happens during trauma, is our agency gets constricted because we're working off the subconscious program. I was like, there is such a disconnect between having enough agency to kind of direct your recovery and also be able to, forgive if that's what you want to do. And that led me into trauma work, and that led me into mental health. And so I come at it later in life as my second career. And I love what each of you are teaching us, and I'm taking that to heart. I think for me, I was tired of being in the theoretical and wanted to be in the practical. And I, as a mom of 5 kids, I will let you know, Cynthia, I end work at 3:00 every day. And I have to. I want to be with them. I want to cook for them. I want to be around them. And that wasn't always the case. When I was in academia, it sure wasn't the case. So thank you for your wisdom, and each of you, because I am definitely taking all of that to heart.
I love this. So we are almost at the end. We've got 2 minutes left. What you've all shared has been amazing. I like to wrap these up with wisdom bombs. If you can each share something meaningful, actionable, something that you really want people to walk away from this conversation with, just lightning round. Let's start with Dr. Carrie, because I can see you you're right next to me. Put you on the spot.
I think mine would be that notion of acceptance. It's nothing wrong with you if everything isn't going perfectly. Just slow down, take a look at what you have, do an assessment, what's working, what isn't. And then from there, you have a lot more power.
Excellent. Cynthia?
don't do it alone. That would be my, I love, I'm a big radical acceptance person too, but don't do it alone. If it means a therapist, get a therapist or a friend, someone that you just need one person in your corner.
Yep.
Yeah. Nicole?
So I'm going to default to, the business owners, is that if you own a business and you're a founder of a business, you are in a relationship with your business. It is something outside of you that you are relating to and connecting to. And so you can be intentional about the relationship that you have with that business. If you don't feel like it's supportive now, you can change that. So get curious about the relationship that you're building or want to change with your business now.
Love it. Amy?
There is so much hope. It is never too late to change and to listen, get curious about what's going on with you, but just using your agency to find the best fit for you, whether it's an individual therapist or a group program or whatever modality, there is so much hope.
Okay, and Shula?
Well, thank you, Amy. I love how you said that because it leads right into what I would say, which is that we are stronger with support.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Applaud you all. I love you all.
Thank you.
And please, if you're listening on the replay, ask questions, add comments, tag us. We will come back. I think it's imperative to keep this conversation going. And I thank each of you for bringing your knowledge, your wisdom, your compassion, your caring, everything to the table today and every day.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Thanks. Connect with all of these women, and I will provide their information. And let's try and make that big change where mental wellness is what we lead with.